Hello everybody and welcome to another list video here at Playing Board Games. I'm Justin and today I'm here to talk about 5 investigators that I want parallel versions of next. We are currently in what I would like to call Arkham Summer, which is not really a nice time to be in Arkham because, well, it's really never to be a nice time in Arkham. There's Cthulhu and other monstrosities running about. But in Arkham Summer, there is no news. We're kind of between the expansions and there's not much happening with the game. This is when I hope that we will hopefully see another parallel investigator in the near future, so that's why I thought this would be a good time to do a list video talking about 5 parallel investigators that I want to see, because I just think it'd be fun to get some during this time. I have no knowledge of when these parallel investigators are going to come out, just going to nip that in the bud right now, but these are the 5 investigators. I chose one for each class that I think would be cool to see in the next line of parallel investigators. Other than that, I don't think I have much to say, so why don't we just dive in and start with number 1 here. In the Guardian side, Leo Anderson. So Leo Anderson, he has an ability that is, when at the start of his turn, he may play an ally asset from his hand, I believe reducing its cost by 1. And this is a pretty neat ability, but Leo Anderson's big thing is that he's always kind of just been his deck building. He's kind of moved out of the ally space once Charlie Kane came in. Charlie really works well with allies, and because Charlie Kane had charismas off the get-go, Leo Anderson kind of just went more into the fact that he was the perfect mix of the Guardian and Rogue class, meaning that he could work with firearms very well in a way that at this point now only really Michael McGlenn can move into that spot. So I guess the question is Leo Anderson going to get his lunch eaten by Michael McGlenn? That at this point remains to be seen, but it could potentially happen. Leo Anderson has a lot of different ways that he plays with his ally decks, but specifically for this parallel version, I still think he should stay with the ally synergy, but we should see, like, evil Leo Anderson. We should see a Leo Anderson that cares about his allies dying. A big thing for Leo Anderson's backstory is that he's kind of like a doomed expedition leader. That's why we saw in his weakness where his allies can, like, go away. And I think that this would be a really cool thing to pursue as a Leo Anderson parallel version. So instead of having a thing where his allies enter play, instead he has an ability where he gets a bonus if his allies leave play. So it's kind of like the meat grinder archetype where you play low-cost allies and then those allies are just there to serve a purpose and then get thrown into the meat grinder, but actually supported on the front of the investigator card. I think that would be really cool to see, and I think that would be a nice thing to give Leo Anderson a very different niche than what Charlie Kane has for the ally things. Also, it's cool to see different deck buildings. So it has one of those things where he has like a smaller Guardian pool, but he has like all allies at like level 0 at least, or like level 1. So it's not as deep as Charlie's ally pool, but like he can get to art student, he can get to laboratory assistant, he can get all of the allies that he already has in his rogue splash that fits this archetype, and maybe even stuff like Mysterious Raven and Stray Cat. I think that this could be a really cool thing for Leo Anderson to explore, and that's why I'm really hoping, fingers crossed, for parallel Leo Anderson is evil Leo Anderson. Next up, we got Joe Diamond here. Joe Diamond is one of my favorite investigators to play. He's just a blast every time, and that free hunch card from the hunch deck is just juicy. Joe Diamond would be a very interesting investigator to see in a parallel form, and the main reason is because he has his hunch deck built on the back of his investigator card. One thing that I don't do too often, I think I've only done it once, maybe twice, since I've ever played a parallel investigator, but with parallel investigators, you are allowed to mix and match. So you can play the front half of the normal version with the back half of the parallel, or the parallel front, normal back, or, of course, normal, normal, parallel, parallel. And this is something that we really have only seen explored in Monterey Jack parallel, because his deck building is so different. But that's just like a deck building difference. Like every investigator kind of has that. But like Jim Culver, for example, has an entirely unique mechanic on the backside of his investigator card. But the reality is with Joe Diamond, he has a hunch deck in the front and the back. So I think that parallel Joe Diamond would be a very interesting parallel investigator to see, because the idea that his hunch deck would work in any combination, right? So like right now his hunch deck is you reveal it, you get the cost -2. I'd be curious to see like what if there was a hunch deck. I'm just spitballing here, but like if the hunch deck was, if the top card of your hunch deck, you may play it. If it deals damage, it deals 1 extra damage. If it gets clues, it gets 1 extra clue, right? And you could put like more than just insights in the hunch deck or that kind of thing. And I think that this would be just a very interesting sort of approach to the idea that like there's a different hunch deck that you can build. His stats stay the same. His ability is just like, how does he interact with his hunch deck differently because of the way the parallels are formed? That would be something that would need to be established. And I just think that ultimately that would be really cool. I also would just love another version of Joe Diamond to play, so he's kind of also here for selfish reasons. Up next, we got our rogue in Finn Edwards. And Finn Edwards is also here mostly for selfish reasons. Finn has very unique deck building where he has Rogue 03, Illicit 05, and then he gets like some Seeker or Survivor cards. And it's a very powerful deck building thing when it has just the diversity that can kind of exist there. But Rogue cards have really kind of been the only illicit cards, so it's Finn's kind of had like Rogue 03 and then a spattering of other Rogue cards in the illicit form. And this is something that the designers in the past have said was a purposeful way to balance Finn Edwards. But then like Trish Scarborough came out and she just kind of like pushed Finn Edwards into the mud. So it kind of like really doesn't make sense anymore. So what I really want from Parallel Finn Edwards is a Finn Edwards that can play high-level rogue cards that he's able to take advantage of to evade. There was a card that came out in Scarlet Keys called Clean Sneak that just felt so strange because it was a level 4 rogue trick, which means it was just outside of both Finn Edwards' pool but also Rita Young's pool. And a lot of people were just kind of left thinking, why? Why did that happen? That doesn't make any sense. And that's kind of like what Finn Edwards has kind of been felt like for the last little bit, where he just kind of doesn't make sense. I think when he first came out, it did fit, and the balance was nice, and there was like that good, clear separation that Finn was different than the previous rogues that came before. And ultimately, I'm not asking to boost his power because we shouldn't all be Trish Scarborough. Trish Scarborough is very, very good at what she does, right? But I think that it would be cool to play a Finn where you could like go higher, like go into those higher rogue stuff, maybe with different restrictions to go with it. Or alternatively, I would love it if they just print some illicit cards in other colors to kind of just see what could happen there. Yeah, Finn Edwards is one I would love to see, but it's mostly for selfish reasons. I think ultimately like his ability on the front for the free evade each turn is neat, but I'd also love to see a Finn that is illicit focused, right? I think that would be a cool thing to see on the front half, because right now his front and his back don't really make sense together. And it's one of those things that the free evade is still very good, don't get me wrong, but I'd be curious to see how he works if he has like a different light was shined on him. I think that could be really cool. Up next, onto our Mystic, we got Akachi Onule. She has an ability where her assets with charges enter with 1 additional charge. And, like, that's kind of it. And, again, there's nothing wrong with Akachi, right? Like, Akachi is totally fine, but she's kind of just, like, a little bit flat at this point. There's some cool things you can do with her. I was just actually recording a video with Eric, which should be coming out on the channel this Sunday, where there's cool things like she has the Enchanted Blade. She can do cool things with I forget the name of the card, the Wish Eater, where she can, like, it enters the charge easier, so it's easier to flip between them. But I think that it's one of those things where now, especially with when you look at some of the charge-based assets, the stuff that we've seen recently, Brand of Cthulhu, Divination, Eyes of the Sleeper, Breath of the Dreamer, right? Or I think other way around for those. But they just come in with a boatload of charges. So Akachi's ability doesn't really do anything. And yes, she is rotating out of current, so she's not really in the mind of the designers anymore. But Parallel kind of exists in this weird nebulous space where these things can still be explored. and I would love to see these things still explored. And I wouldn't even mind if they kept it really simple. Michael McGlynn's ability turned out to be really good, right? It's just like passive income, and that's really nice, and it was really fun to kind of figure it out. What if Akachi had a similar thing? Again, just spitballing, this might be way too powerful, but what if Akachi's parallel Akachi Anyule's ability was, when you spend a charge from an asset, draw a card, limit once per round per asset. That would be a very interesting kind of impact on Akachi and Mystic as a whole. That could be a very nice shift for Akachi to have and actually make some people bring her out, especially if, like, you know, again, swapping between the two could potentially lead to some cool deck building changes to come with it. I'm not saying that any of these thoughts that I had were balanced, but this is kind of just like the space that they could exist in that could just make you go, wow, I want to try it. And that's what I feel like Parallels should be. Generally with Parallels, they go a little bit on the more complex range, and I think that's ultimately good to leave the more simple ideas for the Investigator boxes. Like even that Akachi, Parallel Akachi idea I just had, if that was on an official Investigator, I would be overjoyed, right? But I think that Parallels can exist in a place where they are more complicated, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that while I always err for my own thoughts to be more simple because I'm a simple kind of guy, I would also wouldn't mind to see like crazier ideas cooked up for Akachi. So yeah, I would love to see her just because I think her original version is just a little bit plain. And speaking of a little bit plain, let's go to our last investigator here on the Survivor side, Kelvin Wright. I guess I also could have included Lola Hayes for a neutral. I think her being upgraded into a parallel would be really sick, but she wasn't included in this video. Kelvin Wright he's in a tough spot, right? There's been a lot of discourse about Kelvin Wright on the internet and about how good or bad he is, and I'm not here to really join in on that conversation, right? I'm not here to add into that. But what I do think is that ultimately Kelvin Wright has not really seen support for his archetype, and it's made it so that anyone who has filled a similar space has kind of just like outpaced him. And I think that he has a very cool concept, and I think that a parallel investigator in some cases is an alternate look at that investigator, right? How can we like change the perspective on them to see how they look, how they feel, all that sort of stuff. And I think that in the end, Kelvin Wright probably deserves to get another look. On this channel a lot, we've said we would have loved to see more like trauma-based focused on stuff. And I think that Kelvin Wright could be really cool to get a sort of look that is different ways to look at what trauma means on him, right? And I think that Kelvin Wright is... I've enjoyed playing him. I played him actually last year, and I like playing like a deck that in anyone else would be better, but it's fun to kind of have the fantasy with Kelvin Wright. And we also, Beard convinced me to do Rougarou because it had some cross promotion with his custom campaign Circus Ex Mortis, and I got to do Kelvin Wright as a Rougarou, which turns out is like crack cocaine. It feels so fun. And I think that ultimately Kelvin would be a fun person to boost because he's always been engaging for like even Spikes, like Travis played him back in the day because he thought this could be a cool thing to kind of build with. And I think having just like a parallel version that has just a different look on what trauma means on him or what taking damage is for him, I think could be really neat. And also further separate him from the likes of like Hank Sampson, who is ultimately just kind of like eating a good chunk of his lunch, is the idea of soak, but like the not die or like play, like ride the line between life and death. And that's kind of what Kelvin Wright is. He is about riding that line between life and death in this game, and I feel like a more interesting way of approaching that could lead to a very successful parallel investigator. All right, that is it for this list video. I hope you guys all enjoyed it. What parallel investigators do you want to see? Realistically, there actually isn't that much because most of the ones are either really new or you're just like, I was making this list video, I was like, am I really going to choose 5 investigators from the Forgotten Age? And it turns out I did choose 3. I did choose 3, but that's okay. So, you know, let me know in the comments who you'd want to see. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a good one. And as always, a JJ's.